G'day traders. Well, here we are again, and this is episode 2 of our series where we dive under the hood of our new workflow process titled ATS24. This workflow process has been developed for those retail traders wishing to emulate the philosophy and trading practices of the classic trend follower. Our process allows a retail trader to achieve very wide diversification in terms of which markets to trade and the trend following systems that can be deployed to mimic the processes applied by these successful professional classic trend following fund managers who have a long-term track record in delivering absolute returns for their clients. These successful trend-following managers typically use futures markets to apply their processes, which requires relatively high levels of trading capital. But as a retail trader, we can mimic these processes with lower levels of capital using contracts for difference, or CFDs. However, while CFDs do provide advantages to retail traders with small capital accounts, there is an additional burden in terms of the trade transaction costs using these products, which pose some unique obstacles that need to be addressed by our workflow process. Despite these cost burdens imposed by this type of derivative product, we still can obtain sufficient long-term performance to warrant the use of these products and allow us to trade a process that is robust and can demonstrate long-term performance over a variety of different trading regimes. This additional cost burden is a small price to pay when considering the hidden costs associated with other trading approaches. Using CFDs under the trend-following way allows a retail trader to embark on a different journey to most alternative methods. A journey of survival in a hostile market where you turn a game of luck into a powerful systematic process that exploits market opportunities and mitigates adverse risk events. So, for those who are joining us in this episode, I recommend you listen to episode 1 of our series, where we started from back to front and showcased first the outputs generated from our workflow process. In that episode, we reviewed the portfolio result and examined portfolio performance in detail. But in this episode, we're going to take you back to the beginning of the workflow process to start revealing how we put it all together. So, to begin. In this episode, we'll be looking at the setup of our workflow process and in particular looking at the following topics: loading the ATS24 algorithms into Metatrader 4, the market data we use for our workflow process and the choice of data timeframe, how we define those markets which are suitable for inclusion in our workflow process, and the systematic process we use to create our testing universe used by the workflow process. Now, before we start, it is assumed that traders are savvy with how to install and load Metatrader 4 onto their PCs. MT4 is a very popular free trading platform used by a large number of brokers that offer Forex and CF products to the retail trader. So let's assume in this episode that you have been able to install MT4 onto your computers and are familiar with its basic functionality. Let's therefore start by looking at how we load this systematic workflow process into Metatrader 4, which is supplied to members of the Traders Outpost in the forum. So members of ATS will find that the ATS24 process is located on our members forum under the topic heading Workflow Processes. So down here, you'll notice that this topic is called ATS24 has arrived. We click on this topic here and then we navigate to the very first post. So here we are at the first post. And in this introductory post to this topic, so we find that there are 2 files that are downloadable in this introductory post. We have a zip file containing all of our workflow process algorithms for ATS24, instruction manual which details all of the necessary steps a member needs to consider when undertaking our workflow process. Let's now download the zip file of all of our algorithms by clicking on it. Open that zip file. When we open that zip file, we see that it contains a large number of algorithms which relate to our entire workflow process. Each of these algorithms has a number prefix which relates to the stage of the workflow process, and we sequentially step through this numbered process using our workflow. So now let's copy all of these algorithms and install them onto the MT4 platform. So we highlight all of the algorithms contained in this download directory and we press the Ctrl+C or copy function. We now open up the Metatrader 4 platform and we now want to paste those algorithms that are on our clipboard into the correct directory structure for MT4. So to find that directory structure where we load all of our expert advisors or algorithms, we select File, Open Data Folder. This then puts up a directory. We then go to MQL4. We then select Experts. We then create a directory called ATS24 to keep all of our algorithms organized. And then when we are inside this directory, which initially doesn't have any algorithms loaded in here, just select and press Ctrl+V and paste all of the algorithms that were held on your clipboard. In this case, these have already been loaded onto this directory, so I won't be replacing these existing algorithms. And once that is completed, we close that file directory. We then come to the Navigator section on our MT4 platform. If it's not there, look at View and select Navigator, and that will place the Navigator on our MT4 platform. And then within the expert directory of our Navigator, we highlight anywhere within that region with our right mouse key and press Refresh. And what this will do, it will install all of those algorithms that we have loaded into that directory onto our Metatrader 4 platform. So there we have it. Once that process is complete, all of our algorithms are now loaded into our platform. And if we go to our strategy tester, which is this section of the MT4 platform, if it's not there, open View, select strategy tester to make it available. Then we go to Settings, and then just to ensure that we've loaded all of the algorithms, drop down the list for your expert advisors and have a look at the directory called ATS24, which we created in our file directory, and just make sure that all of those algorithms are visible, which means that they have been installed correctly onto our system. And that's it. We've now installed all of those algorithms into our Metatrader 4 platform, and they are available to use for our workflow process. So now that we have installed the workflow algorithms onto MT4, we now need to turn our attention to our available data history. And to see the data history you have on your platform, select Tools, select History Center, and this will bring up all of the markets held on your platform. And to find the available market history, just select one of these subdirectories, for instance metals here, select the silver, which is XAG USD, double click, and you'll notice that we've got data histories available in a range of different time frame formats. The one we'll be focusing on for our workflow process is the daily data, or the D1 data, and when we double click on that, we notice that this screen refreshes and we see what available data history we have to work with that is provided by our platform. Now, our workflow process is dependent on data, and lots of it. as we use extensive data sets as a basis to assess the robustness of all of our systems that we elect to compile into our diversified trend-following portfolios. Now, rather than making a decision about which markets we want to include in our final trend-following process, in our workflow process, we let the data do the talking and decide for us. This therefore means that the markets that we decide to include in our workflow process do not need to be selected in advance by a deductive logic. So, for example, we do not need to decide from the outset how many markets from which asset classes we want to include in our final portfolios in an attempt to reduce impacts of adverse risk residing in our ultimate portfolio from excessive correlation. The workflow process uses extensive testing across lots of data to make this decision about the final portfolio we use for us. We choose to make this decision a non-discretionary one as opposed to a discretionary verdict, as while different asset classes tend to be less correlated than assets in a single asset class, this generalized assumption may not always be the case, particularly in our methodology that targets outliers. We prefer to let our data history make this decision for us and eliminate any bias that may reside in faulty applied deductive logic. So using the data to make a decision requires us to have lots of historical data that captures as many different market regimes as possible. It is not sufficient to have a data set that is regime specific, as we want to know how our trend following models fare across a myriad of different possible regimes. The objective of our workflow process is not to overfit a trend following model to one particular historical regime, which is presented by, for instance, a single market history, but to test the robustness of our models when presented with many different possible historical scenarios. We therefore need to test our model using alternative data sets from other markets, which represent alternate possible histories. Remember, when we are taking these models live into the future is unwritten. Therefore, we do not want to make our models reliant on a particular history afforded by a single market. We would prefer that our models were agnostic about different possible histories and could trade all of those different possible alternate histories the same way. Given that we need to compare performance across many different histories or many different markets, we like to have a similar extensive data set for each of the markets we use with our workflow process. A key requirement for the inclusion of any market in our ultimate portfolio is therefore dependent on the availability of data across many different markets. So, if we have insufficient data history for any particular market, then we exclude that market from our universe until we can obtain sufficient data to test this market for robustness against other markets. As a general principle, we would not consider a market that does not have at least 10 years worth of data as a bare minimum, but ideally we are looking for at least a data history of 20 to 30 years to test for robustness. If we have the same level of data history for each market, such as 20 to 30 years, that we will be assessing for our ultimate portfolio, then that makes the assessment of strategy robustness far more valid. Now, you should be aware that for our entire workflow process, we are using only daily data. In particular, the information provided in the daily data by the open, the high, the low, and the close of that daily data. Our preference to using daily data is based on our understanding about the nature of market data. Intraday data possesses a far greater degree of noise than daily, weekly, or monthly data. Using daily data provides us a sufficient noise-reduced data set that provides us with a maximum data sample. We won't be discussing why noise increases as we progress down the timescale into intraday data, as this is a complex topic that deserves a series in itself to explain. But our trend following process is not looking for fidelity in the nature of discrete data sets. Our process is looking for commonality across data sets. What we mean by this is that we require a vast data sample to incorporate outliers into our data, and we are not looking for individual characteristics that reside in a single data set, but rather universal characteristics that occur in any liquid market data. In our hunt for outliers, we need a coarse-grained approach using lots of sample size. In addition to our need for sufficient data history of coarse-grained data, another key requirement in our robustness search is to only trade liquid market data. The reason for the need for liquidity is implicitly connected to our process that demands we cut losses short at all times. Illiquid market data can mean that our losses could be large with associated slippage or trading gaps, which we need to avoid to stick to our trend following mantra. In our CFD world, the degree of liquidity exhibited by market data is reflected by the spread assigned to particular markets. The lower the average bid-ask spread, the more liquid the market. We therefore need to be careful when selecting markets that have very high spreads. We will be visiting this criteria later on in this episode when we review the spreads of all markets selected for our workflow process. Now, when a retail trader signs up to Metatrader through a broker, there tends to only be a limited data history available to the trader from the selected markets offered by that broker. For example, many of the popular highly liquid markets may only have 5 to 10 years of daily data supplied by that broker. So, for instance, if we opened up in our FX Majors Euro USD and go to the daily data, we might find that that data history commences from, say, the year 2010 up to current day, which therefore only gives us around about 12 years of historic data. But we need much more data than that for our workflow process. So fortunately for members of the Traders Outpost, Fred and I have been scavenging historical data from many data sources, which we use to supplement the data provided by different broker data sources. And we provide this additional data, which our members can use to supplement their existing data sets through our forum. So for example, when we're on the forum, if we scroll down to historical data for long range testing and open that particular topic and go to the original post, so here we are, and we go to the base of that introductory post, we see a download zip file called Pepperstone data. And if we click on that and download that data, when we open that zip file, we see that it contains approximately 57 different markets with long-range historical data, some of it going 50 years or more. Now, I won't be explaining how we append this long-range historical data to our existing data sets, but we have prepared an earlier YouTube video which our members can refer to understand how to use this long-range data and append it to their existing historical data sets provided by their broker. So now that we've explained to you how to load the algorithms into your Metatrader platform for our workflow process, and you have ensured that you've got sufficient data history to undertake these workflow processes, now it's time to move on to step 1 of the workflow process, which is used to generate a symbol list which is used by the workflow process at all steps of the way throughout the entire process. The symbol list represents a complete universe of symbols or markets that we wish to test through our workflow process. And to generate this symbols list, we need to use 2 algorithms. The first algorithm, which is the create bat file algorithm, and a second algorithm, which is the create symbol list algorithm. So the first thing we want to do is to load the first algorithm titled ATS24 create bat file as our first algorithm we wish to work with our workflow process. We select it and then we go to expert properties. In the expert properties, we are simply using this tab, the Inputs tab, where we assign the account login for our broker platform here, the account password for our broker platform here, the account server, such as a demo server or live server, and this section here is if we are engaging this workflow process in portable mode or not. Most of the traders who will be using this algorithm won't be using the portable mode, so set it to false. If you want more information about what portable mode means, then please ask us a query on our forum and Fred will be more than happy to explain it to you. Once these settings have been applied for our create bat file, we then move to the next stage workflow process, step 2, the create symbol set list, and go to expert properties once again. Once again, we only refer to the inputs tab here, and here we are looking at a spread multiplier to apply to our complete symbol list. Now what this spread multiplier does is it allows us to establish conservative spreads for our testing processes. If we used a bid-ask spread of 1, that would be using the current spread applied by any market we select for our testing process. If we use a value of 2, it therefore conservatively applies double the spread to the existing bid-ask spread applied to markets on our broker platform. So for example, if I look at Euro USD, I notice that the current spread in points is 6 points. By setting a spread multiplier of 2 and including Euro USD in our testing universe, that will therefore apply a spread value for all future historical testing purposes of 2 times the spread, or 12 points. This allows us to incorporate a degree of slippage into every single trade that is undertaken through our workflow process, and is a conservative basis to reflect the fact that over the course of history, the bid-ask spread is going to change. By selecting double the current spread, that therefore ensures that our workflow process conservatively pitches a spread to use for our workflow processes, which is conservative in nature. Now, of importance is the fact that when you undertake this symbol creation process, make sure that the markets are open. Otherwise, a spread can be extreme and not representative of actual live trading conditions. So now that we have set up the expert properties for each of the 2 expert advisors used to create the symbol list, it's now on to how we select the symbol list using the Market Watch menu of our broker platform. So here we are looking at the market watch list, which is visually represented for our platform. We've got the ability to turn off and turn on discrete markets in this market watch list to configure the market watch list to represent those markets that we wish to consider for our workflow process. The first thing we want to do is to reconfigure this market watch list to those markets that we want to test using our workflow. If the market watch list isn't expressed on your MT4 platform, simply select View and select Market Watch. That therefore toggles on and toggles off the market watch list. So in this case, now we want to reconfigure this market watch list to represent those symbols that we wish to test through our workflow process. So the easiest way to do this is when you're within the market watch list, click anywhere with the right-hand mouse button and select Hide All. This therefore hides most of the markets that are visible on our market watch list. To turn these ones off, individually click on them and select Hide. Well, in this case, my platform's playing around a bit. Normally these would go off and go on. However, I do actually want to include these markets in my testing universe for my workflow process, so I'll just keep them there. But how do we add other markets into a list that we're going to be testing through our workflow process? To do that, within the market watch list, select right-hand mouse button and then select Symbols. So, in this particular test for this workflow process, I want to include all Forex majors. So I click within this and then toggle each of these Forex majors on. So they're all on as opposed to being off. So I've got all of my Forex majors now represented. I now want to go into my Forex minors, include all of these. I now want to go into my crosses, my Forex crosses, include all of these. I don't want to include any exotics in my testing because these markets generally can be illiquid markets with very high spreads. So I exclude the exotics. I want to include metals in my process, such as silver in US dollars, such as gold in my US dollars. I might also include palladium in my watch list and platinum in my watch list. The others I'm not too concerned about, but you can of course select all of them because the workflow process will evaluate any ones you select. In energies, I want to select, because I know the data history for gasoline is limited, I want to select natural gas, spot Brent and spot crude because I know there's sufficient data history. But otherwise, if you don't know, select all of them. So in this case, I'll select all of them. In my FX, my Forex indexes, I don't wish to include any there. That's currency indexes. In my indices, I want to include my Aussie index. I want to include the German index. This is equivalent to the DAX. I want to include the NASDAQ index. I want to include the Nikkei, which is expressed as the Japanese 225. I want to include the Hong Kong 50, which is the Hang Seng index. I want to include the FTSE, and I want to include the US 500, which is already included, and the Dow Jones, the US 30. So that's sufficient for my indexes for this example. For my commodities, I want to, well, I'll select all of them, but the limited data history on some of them at a later stage I can strip back when I review and refine my symbol list generated through this process. So I'm just selecting all of them now. I also want to include in my crypto, let's include Bitcoin. Here we go here. So that's it for this example where I've now selected the universe of markets that will be generated through this symbol list creation. So we've now set everything up for the symbol list creation. Let's go ahead and create that symbol list. To do that, I select the first algorithm again, the create bat file algorithm. So the first stage of this workflow process is to generate the bat files that are going to run the symbol generation process. So let's do that by pressing start. So that's it. It's a very quick process and it's now generated bat files that can be executed to then generate our symbol list. So to see where those bat files have been created, we've got to go to File, we've got to go to Open Data Folder, we've got to go to the Tester subdirectory, we've then got to go to the Files subdirectory. In here, we're going to see a folder called ATS24 Sim. That is a symbol directory which currently comprises a range of bat files which relate to the markets we've selected for our workflow process. But as you'll notice, there is an extension of a TXT on the end of these files. So these are unprocessed files that we need now to process using the batch file method of symbol creation. To do that, in this listing, we've got to look for a file with the extension bat.txt. This is it here. This is a file that we now need to locate within this symbol list. When we click on that file, the first thing we've got to do is change that extension from a .txt extension to a BAT extension. When we do that, we get a message saying if you change a file name extension, the file may become unusable. Are you sure you want to change it? In this case, we select yes. So notice now how it's been accepted and we've now got a .bat extension to that bat file. This is the file that runs all of these processes to generate the symbol list. Now this is important. Before we launch this bat file process, we've got to first turn off Metatrader or close the Metatrader platform. So we go to Metatrader and close it. That therefore just leaves the directory file structure up on the screen. Now that we've closed Metatrader, we're now ready to commence the process by selecting the BAT file, right-clicking and selecting Run as Administrator, and then selecting Yes. So here we go. You'll notice that an MS-DOS file is now created, which operates the opening and closing of Metatrader in the background. And as it's opening and closing Metatrader, it's sequentially running through all of those .txt symbol list files and creating a symbol list for each of those markets. We'll let this process run for about 5 minutes or 3 to 5 minutes, where it then iterates through the entire sequence of markets we've selected for our watch list, for our universe, for our workflow process, and generates this symbol list. So I'll return to it once it's completed this process. So here we are at the end of the symbol generation process, and you'll notice that all of those .txt files have now been eliminated from the directory, and instead now we've got a CSV spreadsheet which includes all of the symbols and their associated details. We also have another file which is the original BAT file which ran this process. Now that we've completed this process, we can simply delete this BAT file. So in our symbol list directory, we now just have our CSV spreadsheet remaining. And if we open up that spreadsheet, we'll notice now we've got our complete symbol list, which will be used for testing at all stages of the workflow process. We've also got a column which includes the spread times 2 that we used to multiply the spread by 2 to get a conservative estimate of spread to incorporate slippage and conservative assumptions in our historical testing. We also note that there is the earliest date of available data here, which is very handy for us because as we scroll through the list, we can see those markets where we've got insufficient data, and we can eliminate that data from the list. There are many benefits to generating this symbol list, and some of them are as follows. Because we're using a systematic process here in generating our symbol list, we are ensuring that we are using the correct nomenclature of all symbols expressed by our broker for our workflow process. So for example, in this listing here, which includes all of the broker specifications for the nomenclature of those markets, we're using the correct names. Furthermore, for many retail traders who don't have professional status in Australia, they might be using markets with an extension .a on their markets. This is a regulatory requirement for retail traders in Australia to specify the markets that are available to retail traders versus the markets that are available to professional traders. And the reason that is done is because the broker assigns margin regulations to those individual markets that retail traders are allowed to trade with. But for professional traders, they don't have that extension. In this case, this nomenclature you see here for these symbol listings from our broker reflects a professional trader. But many of our members who are retail traders will find that their markets have a suffix .a at the end of the market name, such as Euro, USD, .a. Another significant benefit of this symbol list is that this single symbol list is used for reference by our workflow process at all steps in the way. So unlike other third-party applications such as Strategy Quant X or alternative software providers that you generate custom workflow projects for each individual market. In this case, because we've identified our symbol list for processing purposes, we never have to individually rename a market. The process looks to all of the markets and iterates accordingly, so it saves considerable time. And also, once you've set up this symbol list, there is very little to do once it's all been established. The conservative spread is a very valuable tool to use to ensure that your workflow process operates on data with conservative cost assumptions embedded into it. And the date range here is a very good guide to enable you to quickly review the markets in your listing to ensure they've got sufficient data. For instance, here I've only got data back to 30th of December 2011 for the Singapore Singapore dollar. I want to delete that market from my listing as that is insufficient data for me. Now, of course, it's up to our members to decide what is insufficient or sufficient for their purposes, but for my own personal preference, I eliminate those markets that don't have sufficient data. For the pound Aussie dollar, that's probably still too insufficient for me. I have been known to use those particular markets, but for conservative reasons for this video, I've been conservative and eliminated it from the process. And as we scroll down here, we might see other further markets which have limited data, such as GBP CAD. I'll delete that from the list. As I scroll through, I notice that platinum has got insufficient data, unfortunately, so I've got to delete it from the list, as we need data to assess the validity of our workflow process. This clearly gasoline has only got 1 year of data, so that goes from our listing. Let's have a further look. The DAX has got insufficient data for my personal requirements. I'll eliminate that. But as you can see, this process of, now when we come to the commodities here, a large number of these, such as London sugar, lean hogs, lumber, has insufficient data, unfortunately. I've got to delete them. So as you can see, I'm refining the list based on available data to ensure that my workflow process is valid. Now, in relation to Bitcoin, I've got two examples here. I must have used that twice in my symbol listing. I'm going to delete one of them. Okay, so that's the first step, making sure we've got sufficient data to undertake our workflow process. Now what we want to do is look at the liquidity of the particular markets by looking at the spread. As mentioned before, high spread indicates low liquid markets. So in this case, I'm going to delete my palladium because the spread here in points is vast, much higher than any of the other markets, and that is too high for me to accept for liquidity purposes personally. Now, of course, anyone can include it if they wish, but just recognize that the spread is large on palladium. I'm deleting that from the process. In relation to the Japanese yen and the Hong Kong dollar, I notice that they've got very large spreads, but remember we doubled the spread for the generation of this symbol list. So I'm still going to be conservative, but I'm going to reduce the massive impact of this spread by assuming it might be only 100 points as opposed to 160 points. For the Hong Kong dollar, I'm going to reduce that to, say, 70 points as opposed to 100 points. Cattle, well, there's insufficient data there in the date range. I'm deleting that one from the list. Cocoa, that's probably a bit too much for me. I'm going to select 75 points, which is above the original spread, but not double. Coffee, I'm going to accept 75 there. Corn, insufficient data, that goes. Cotton, I'm going to reduce that. That's way too high, so I'm going to go to 400 points for cotton, which is still greater than the original spread. OJ, or orange juice, I'm going to make that 100. So I'm still applying conservative figures, but does not double for these ones with very high spreads. Oats, insufficient data. Rough rice, insufficient data. They go from my list. Bitcoin, well, Bitcoin we know is large naturally. I'm going to reduce that to 3,500, which is still higher than the current spread, but it's not double, which puts too much pressure on the performance criteria to pass our testing processes. So once you're generally happy with this symbol listing, The next thing I'd probably do is sort it in alphabetical order, because in my workflow process I want it to occur in an order that when I come to my PC and see how the process is going, I'll know at what step of that workflow process it is, based on the alphabetical nature of the iterated listing which is conducted through the process. So to do that, I'm just going to insert a row here. I'm going to highlight these columns that incorporate all of the columns of data. I'm going to select my filter, and I'm now going to sort it in alphabetical order from A to Z. So I've now resorted that entire listing in alphabetical order. I'm happy with that. Now what I want to do is delete that row, and now I want to save this and overwrite the CSV file now with this sorted order. So now I've saved it, the CSV file, I've resorted it, I'm happy with that, I'm happy with the selection, I'm happy with the spread I'll be using for the workflow process, and I'm happy that there is sufficient data in this symbol listing. And so now I close that spreadsheet, and now I am good to go with my future steps of my workflow process. So that brings it to an end of this particular episode. This was an introductory episode into setting up the workflow process. So in our next future episodes, we'll now be stepping more rigorously through the process itself, which goes beyond the setup phase. For the next step, which commences the robustness testing phase of our workflow process. I hope you enjoyed this episode. It was a bit long-winded. There was a lot to understand in relation to the setup, but as you can see, once you understand these processes, to set up and generate this symbol listing is a very quick process that might only take 10 to 20 minutes. And as you're familiar with in episode 1, we undertake this process every year. So this step of the process, which involves those first 2 algorithms, takes about 20 minutes of your time each year to undertake. Now, one of the benefits of doing this process annually is that as we get more and more data, or can append more data that we obtain into our data history, it allows us to include new markets into that symbol list on an annual basis. Also, we conduct this process annually to revisit the spreads that are assigned to all of the market data we use for our workflow process, and ensure that those spreads are current to the particular year of undertaking this process. So that's it for this section of the workflow process. We hope you enjoyed it. So in the next episode, which we'll be producing over the next week or so, we'll be introducing you to the design logic of the workflow process. And this is where we develop the core designs around which we undertake a degree of data mining, but ensures that we embed the core principles of trend following into all the models we use for our portfolio development. So stay tuned to next episode. We look forward to seeing you again. Bye.